Hill 314, Montchoix, the impossible stand. 700 men, 1 rocky hill, and 4 Panzer divisions closing in. Hitler ordered their destruction, but they refused to break. Discover how they survived. Subscribe for more untold history.
The humidity of Normandy clung to the rocky slopes. Second Lieutenant Robert Weiss crouched in a shallow foxhole. Below him, the heavy grinding of Panzer treads began. Metal clanked against metal in the thick, black night. The French called this high ground the Mountain of Joy. To the American army, it was simply Hill 314. 700 men of the 120th Infantry stood ready. Most of these men would never leave this crest. Weiss was only 21, an observer from Pennsylvania. He carried a 35-pound radio in a leather case. The FM signal reached just 5 miles to the west. He wore his father's wool shirt from the Great War. From this peak, the entire horizon belonged to him. He saw the roads, the town, and the highway. That highway was the lifeline for General Patton's army. But 4 Panzer divisions were screaming toward his position. 26,000 German soldiers moved through the dark fog. Adolf Hitler had personally ordered this desperate hammer blow. The mission was simple: reach the coast at Avranches. If they succeeded, the Allied breakout would finally collapse. Only one isolated infantry battalion stood in their way. They had no tanks, no heavy guns, and no exit. What followed was a masterpiece of small unit grit. The crisis began in the mind of a dictator. By August 1944, the German Empire was rapidly crumbling. Operation Cobra had shattered the lines near St. Lo. American armor poured through gaps in the broken front. The road to Paris was open and completely undefended. Field Marshal von Kluge begged for a tactical retreat. Hitler saw only cowardice and demanded a massive counterstrike. He ordered 8 Panzer divisions to strike the coast. He promised 1,000 planes that no longer existed. The German generals knew the plan was pure fantasy. The panzers were exhausted, under strength, and bleeding out. Von Kluge was forced to obey or face execution. He assembled 4 divisions for a midnight ghost attack. They fielded 300 armored vehicles for the push. Against them stood the 30th Division, called Old Hickory. These were National Guardsmen from the American South. They had spent 2 months dying in the hedgerows. The men were exhausted and promised a quiet sector. They moved into Mortain as the Germans began moving. Lieutenant Colonel Hardaway set his post in the town. 3 rifle companies climbed the steep, rocky hillside above. King Company took the north, near the Bonvoisin farm. G Company covered the chapel among the jagged rocks. The soldiers had only light mortars and small bazookas. Their 57mm guns were useless against heavy German steel. But they had the eyes of the 230th Artillery. Frank Denius, a 19-year-old Texan, watched the valley. He had already earned a Silver Star for bravery. The observers plotted coordinates for every single road crossing. They logged emergency barrage numbers for every likely target. As the sun set, they improved their shallow holes. Then, at midnight, the world began to shake violently. The 2nd SS Panzer Division struck without any warning. German infantry led the tanks through the narrow lanes. They shouted battle cries to mask their own terror. The American roadblocks were quickly overrun by heavy armor. Hardaway's battalion headquarters fell in the opening hours. The men on Hill 314 were suddenly completely alone. They were surrounded, isolated, and cut off from command. SS troops crawled up the slopes with grenades ready. Hand-to-hand fighting broke out in the dark forest. Sergeant Denius muffled his radio to hide the light. Lieutenant Weiss began calling fire missions by pure sound. He rained 105mm shells onto the grinding tank engines. The first assault broke under a wall of steel. But the panzers would be back at first light. The German offensive required the capture of this hill. Without it, their columns were exposed to the sky. The dawn of August 7th brought a new terror. The fog lifted to reveal a valley of fire. Allied panzers were not coming to save the battalion. Instead, British Typhoons screamed over the jagged ridge lines. Their rockets slammed into the stalled German armored columns. Steel fragments tore through the heavy Mark IV hulls. The psychological weight of the air war was absolute. German crews abandoned their tanks and ran for cover. But on the hill, the American situation turned grim. The soldiers were trapped in a ring of steel. Ammunition counts dropped to a few rounds per man. The August heat baked the men in their foxholes. Water became more precious than gold or silver bullets. Men drank from muddy shell craters to stay alive. The stench of the dead began to haunt the summit. Medics worked with nothing but dirty rags and hope. The 230th Field Artillery became the battalion's only pulse. Gunners fired 2,000 shells every single day. Lieutenant Weiss and Sergeant Denius never left their radios. They were the invisible shield protecting the dying infantry. When radio batteries flickered, a new crisis emerged. Without the observers, the hill would surely fall tonight. Colonel Veman devised a desperate plan for aerial resupply. He packed medical supplies into empty propaganda shell casings. American gunners literally shot morphine at their own men. The canisters split open, scattering bandages across the rocks. It was a miracle of engineering born of pure necessity. On the third evening, a German officer approached slowly. He carried a white flag and spoke perfect English. The ultimatum was clear: surrender now or be destroyed. He gave the Americans 90 minutes to decide fate. Lieutenant Ralph Curley looked at his bleeding, hungry men. He remembered the long road from the Omaha beaches. The wounded rose from their holes to hear the news. Curley did not hesitate or ask for a vote. He told the German to go straight to hell. The Americans would hold the hill or die trying. The final German assaults were the most brutal yet. SS Grenadiers threw everything they had at the perimeter. The hill became a volcano of dirt and jagged metal. But the artillery wall held the German tide back. For 6 days, 700 men defied 4 divisions. They broke the back of Hitler's final French gamble. When the relief columns finally broke through the lines, only 300 men could walk down the mountain. They were ghosts covered in the dust of Normandy. Hill 314 remained a monument to their iron will. The road to Avranches stayed open for Patton's tanks. The German army in France was now truly finished. The mountain of joy had become a mountain of sacrifice. History would never forget the stand at Mortain.